Alright guys, welcome back to the shop. So today we're getting started on the Elkan Backpack. We're going to be starting on the top front panel, which is probably one of the more complicated parts of this bag. And I'm really excited because I've done a lot of design iterations for it, so we're going to walk you guys through that before we actually get going on making the part. Alright, so this first part has already been through 2 iterations before we kind of got into the design that I think has the highest chance of success. So let me walk you guys through what went wrong with the first 2, and both of them are actually pretty logical, but there's things that I just needed to kind of learn for my own sake. So our first pocket here is what kind of the original design was. So we have a front piece of 1000 denier Cordura with a single number 5 zipper, and we had this nice little flap folded over the front to hide that zipper. Then the inside panel is made from 400 denier ripstop. We've got 2 zippers. There's no flaps, no nothing extra there. They're just pieces of zipper with a couple of pockets in there. And then we also have a middle piece of that 400 denier ripstop in order to create the separation for these pockets. So overall, we basically have 3 layers of fabric making up this piece, as well as a few layers of folded pieces here and there in order to add in our zippers. Now, the problem that I ran into with this first iteration is that we ended up being a little bit too thick, because the original plan was to take those 3 separate panels, and so we would take our inside 2 panels, put them together, take our outside panel, keep it on its own, face the outside of those panels towards each other, and then feed one side of our zipper in between there, stitch it all together, and then when it was all stitched together, we'd roll it inside out, and that's kind of how I always do. That's basically the same process for how I do the zippers on all these other pockets. Now, the problem with that is that my materials were just way too thick. There was a lot of things I didn't think about were necessary when doing this. So a few things here right off the bat. Our fold here added basically double the amount of that 1000 denier Cordura right on top of where we also have a zipper, which is also super thick. With my zippers too, I went through and actually ended up doing the ends with leather. So I had the piece of zipper with the teeth cut off, then I had another piece of leather on top of that, then I had that stitched into our pieces here. Then I also had zippers lined up with each other. So my outside zipper and my inside zipper were on top of each other. So what it ended up being that caused the primary problem was this stack right here was almost a ½ inch thick of just zippers and leather and fabric, and it was just an excessively thick part of the piece, and it was never going to be able to fold out nicely. So my first idea was to cut off a big chunk of this panel, which is what I've done with this one so far, and put on these little leather transition pieces. Now on this first one, again, parts were still too thick. I couldn't stitch around them nicely and it didn't work out. Also, I tried using a number 10 zipper and it looked really just overkill. It looked excessively large. I didn't like the look of it. So then I went in and redesigned it a little bit and we came up with this one. So this was the second iteration, again, continuing on with that idea of using those leather transition pieces, but without really changing anything on the designs on the inside here. So what we're trying to do now is limit the amount of material anywhere near our zipper. We also want a nicer transition between our pocket and our zippers. So the idea now is we're going to go back to the original idea of taking flat panels, folding them inside out, and then once we stitch our zippers in, rolling them to face outwards. And now with our pieces cut out of the paper pattern, we can move over to cutting out our actual pieces of fabric. So we're going to be using my 2 favorite fabrics on this project. We're going to be using some 1000 denier Cordura for the exterior, and then some 400 denier ripstop for the interior. Cordura, if you guys don't know, is a very well-recognized brand. It's an extremely durable, basically nylon canvas material. It is probably the best material that you can buy. And then this other fabric, this 400 denier ripstop, it doesn't have a specific brand. I buy it from Paycana here in Calgary, which is just a local supply company. And I really like this too. It's a 400 denier nylon and it has the ripstop pattern to it. Funny enough, these pants that I've had since high school are actually ripstop material. And you can see here, I've gotten rips in them and yeah, they don't spread throughout. They've got enough time to go back in and stitch it up. So this ripstop material, this is just a cotton ripstop. So I'm a huge fan of ripstop in general. But anyway, the other thing to understand about this too is I like to over-engineer my bags a lot. Now, realistically, I could make this bag out of like 500 denier Cordura and use like a 70 denier liner, just lighter weight materials overall. but I like to, because I'm mixing in that leather in there, and leather is already a fairly heavy and robust material, I want to kind of match the quality of the leather with the fabrics that I'm using. So by using a bit of a heavier weight liner at this 400 denier nylon, and then using 1000 denier cordura for the exterior parts, again, we're just kind of matching the weight and the toughness of the leather that we're also putting on this bag. So now we're gonna move on to the zippers. So on the interior of the bag, we're gonna be using number 3 zippers just because they're a little bit more compact and they're a little bit more out of the way. They're not as obnoxious as our number 5 zippers. And then on the exterior of the bag, where we want more easily accessible pockets and whatnot, and the bigger zipper pull that you can pull on, we're gonna use a number 5 zipper, as well as on the vertical part of this pocket, we're also gonna be using number 5 zippers. So I wanna kind of explain to you guys how I've dealt with zippers in the past and what caused the problem on those first iterations and how we're gonna solve that now. So this is a number 10 zipper off of a different bag that I ripped apart. And so you can see here, typically what I do is I cut the teeth off of the end portion. Depending on the size of the zipper, how big of a piece of leather in here that I want, depends how much of the teeth I cut off. But in this case, we've cut off about 1 inch of the teeth, and then we'd put a piece of leather on there that is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches long to cover up that end of the zipper. So the problem that we ran into initially is that we then had this thickness of this nylon webbing, nylon or polypropylene, whatever the zipper is made of. Anyway, we had this thicker bit of fabric here, plus a piece of 3 to 4 ounce leather. Even if I skive it down, it's still probably close to 1 to 2 ounces, which is fairly thick compared to any kind of fabric. On top of that, then we're stitching fabric on top of that, and overall you can just see how the layers just start building up and building up and building up and building up. So instead, we're gonna take our zipper, make sure that we are right off our teeth right on the edge of it, so we're gonna cut it off like that. We're gonna take a piece of fabric, and with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're gonna stitch our fabric to the end of our zipper. We can then roll both of them outwards, and that'll make sure that at the edge of our piece of material, the piece of the pocket that we're trying to create, all we have is a single piece of 1000 denier cordura. All right, so right away we're having some technical difficulties. So I stitched the number 5 zipper here, and I am not happy. It doesn't look great. Now I think once we get things kind of evened out, I think it'll work out fine. But the problem right now is that the piece that I measured out, so I took the 1-inch overlap that I wanted, plus a 1/4 inch for our seam allowance, and that is not enough material. Because when I take these two pieces and I stretch them out against my pattern here, you can see that they don't line up properly. We're just a little bit too short. Now this should have been pretty obvious to me. Hindsight being 2020, I knew, I was thinking about this when I was cutting out the pieces, that I shouldn't just add a 1/4 inch of seam allowance. I should add extra material so that I can cut it off later. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of this video, that other parts of this project I've added extra material specifically so that I can cut it to fit later. And that's what I should have done with these. So rather than making these 1 1/4, I should have made them 1 1/2, and then we would have had, we would have had an extra 1/4 inch that we could have cut off either side. So an extra 1/2 inch total to make sure that these zippers fit the width that I needed. Again, it's all about the learning. It's all about the learning with this project. This is a very complicated bag. I gotta keep reminding myself of that. And I have no idea what I'm doing when it really comes to bag making still. I'm still very much so in the learning stage. So it is going to be a process kind of figuring this stuff out. So that actually worked a lot better. I'm gonna get the other two number 3 zippers fixed and do that same thing where we add more length to it. And then we're gonna do a little 1/8 inch stitch just to hold everything down nice and flat. I think that's gonna work really well. I remember why I don't like this technique. So basically what happens is you can kind of see here how lumpy and just uneven that stitch is. The ones with the 1000 denier cordura are actually pretty good in the number 5 zippers. When we get down to the 400 denier ripstop and the number 3 zippers, things get a little bit lumpier and a little bit uglier. And the reason it makes sense completely, because you're trying to step the sewing machine foot over that plastic. So you're going from this fairly thin fabric on the edges over this thick, hard plastic. You're trying to punch the needle through those plastic teeth, which in this case with the plastic teeth, it's really not that big of an issue. The needle just kind of pushes the teeth away or just breaks them because it's a big, strong enough needle. So that's not really the part that I'm concerned about. It's more so just the unevenness of everything. That's the part that I don't know if I like that. And so we'll see that if when we stitch all of our parts together, because these zippers, they look good enough that I'm willing to move on to the next stage of this. But we'll see there if they kind of start to look bad, because basically our next stage is going to be taking our fabric, stitching it face down on our zipper, stitching along that edge, rolling it out, doing another stitch on it, and then folding everything out to make our final pockets. And so we're going to start actually assembling these pockets in tomorrow's video. We're out of time for the day. My dog is starting to give me that look like he really wants to go for a walk, so I need to get him out of here, and then I need to get ready to go to work. So as always guys, I do hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you in the next one.